Okay, well, thank you for agreeing to talk with us today. So just to start off, if you can just briefly introduce yourself, your company, and your role in the company.
Sure. I'm Dave Kochbeck. I'm the chief scientist for Silicon Valley Bank. We are the largest mid-sized bank in the world. We service 65% of the global venture capital market and about 80% of venture capital in California. And we have been the leader in venture in innovation banking since, well, for the last 35 years. So. Um,
Cool, very impressive to talk to you, actually. So I'd like to first ask you, what do you think is the most valuable thing in working with a company like Softjourn when you're looking at applying new technology in your bank?
Sure. The most important thing by far is the ability to contain the risk for looking at a new technology, and the ability to ease yourself into a cold pool when you don't know whether you want to do something, you don't know how you want to do something, or you don't know why you want to do something. And it's much safer in an organization where you have to have stable budgets and a fairly predictable plan, like a bank, especially. If you have external partners who can be the variable set of unknowns on your behalf, so that you can understand the world a lot better, a lot sooner, and not have to do it essentially on stage for an organization who's really used to everything already being known.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great to have a partner who not only can do sort of sturdy implementations, right? There are actually plenty of external firms that can do routine implementation that are body shops, but there are actually very few providers who are capable of doing experimental implementations and exploring the unknown, and still provide the ability to both contain costs and risk. So that's sort of the secret sauce, and Softjourn is sort of my go-to for that sort of thing.
Okay, well, it's interesting to hear, cool to hear. So for those people who haven't started working with a third-party company like Softjourn and they're looking at innovation, what would you say to them for getting started?
The first thing I would probably say in terms of getting started is, um, it's easy to focus on costs, and it's probably the last thing you should consider. Um, Frankly, no matter who you go with as an external provider, you'll almost certainly benefit from a cost perspective. And so you can kind of cross that off the list as already going to be okay.
Mhm.
The most important thing is probably, are you working with someone? How do you evaluate that the people you're working with are people who know how to source the talent they need to look at a topic, and also are they the kind of people who can creatively problem solve their way out of problems they haven't seen before? That there are a lot of, almost anyone can promise you that they're going to be able to hire out the perfect person for this or that, but the reality is they won't be the perfect person. There almost never is a perfect person for innovation. There's the people you've got and their willingness to learn. And so it's critical to identify very early on who on your external and internal teams are the people willing to learn the most, the fastest, and in areas that are unpredictable and moving,
Mhm.
and then bring the rest of the team along.
Mhm.
Um, that's got to be sort of the most important thing,
Mhm.
finding out how to partner to learn about things that you aren't sure about.
Mhm. Okay, sounds really interesting. So I think there's another area that working with a company like Softjourn has maybe been able to help you with, and that was one thing for like you're looking at innovation and applying it in your company, and how do you use those projects that you do with an external provider to help you sell your use cases or solutions internally? How do you go about doing that?
Sure. So I have a very funny relationship with this topic because frequently the frequently what we make I have no intention of putting it in production, or my intent is essentially to antagonize a particular, catalyze a particular topic in the organization,
Hmm.
and use what we've built as a catalyst to move forward that topic. For instance, we worked on a project that had to do with the automation of loan origination, which is obviously a key business for us. And we haven't aggressively automated it over the last 20 years. We've done sort of dribs and drabs of automation.
Hmm.
So we did a fairly aggressive product where we went at our largest, our largest, most active book, and sort of automated the entire thing head on, and layered in all the SVB special things that people have always claimed that'll be really hard to automate. So we demonstrated through a series of experiments, no, it actually isn't all that hard to automate. It wasn't easy, but it was possible.
Hmm.
And so we went from that project actually went from being sort of a proof of concept that it was really possible to automate the work to there's currently an enterprise-wide initiative to do global automation of our entire loan book. And it essentially justified building the business case for doing a complete revamp of that across the entire enterprise. It's probably the biggest project in the bank right now.
Hmm.
And it's expected to produce over the next 5 years. I think it's expected to produce the most savings of any project that's on the rails right now. And that really started with sort of an antagonistic experiment with Softjourn, that said, you know, I don't believe you. I think I can automate this. And so that's
Hmm.
where that came from. We'll probably save more than a third of $1 billion over 5 years
Hmm.
as a
Hmm.
result of that. So
Oh, all right. That sounds like a very good ROI on that. Yeah, very cool. Good payback. So maybe you can give some advice to some people who might be looking at this, especially banks, and obviously everybody is being pushed now. You should be working with fintechs. So I'd like to switch gears, and maybe you can give some advice to companies because you have open APIs, you work with some fintechs. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you would suggest to them for, what they should keep in mind when working with those types of third parties.
sure. Probably the thing that as a fintech you most need to keep in mind is that your financial services partner, the people who ultimately are running the rails for an API, and such, um, the restrictions that they live inside of, are fairly inflexible and fairly opaque. It's often the case that we can't even tell you why we're saying no, sometimes because of a legal restriction where we actually can't, you, the customer, can't tell you why we're doing something we're doing to your account. And so um, a lot of when we talk about open banking, the word open is a very strange word in an industry that most of the governance laws have secrecy in their name. Um, that so open means something very different to financial services, and it's evolving very quickly. And you cannot always make the assumption that you or your integrator providers or that everyone in the chain may have very little control over how open banking really is.
Hmm.
Um, and it's important to anticipate how that's going to affect you as a business. And if things change, which frequently banks have no ability to keep things from changing out from under themselves, and they pass along that change to the people connected to them,
Hmm.
how you'll absorb those changes as you go along. Building very flexible systems to so that you're able to react to changes that you didn't have any say in is
Hmm.
very important. And it's not just because banks want to mess with you. I promise that it's not. Um,
Okay.
but building out that flexibility is really important. And so the cleaner you can make code and the easier you can make it to change, which
Mhm.
account you're connected to and how the keys get passed and what the state machine is that goes through the phases of account creation. The easier you can make it to modify those in a sturdy way and then go back through and audit it to demonstrate that you've met a new requirement, the
Mhm.
better your life will be. a,
Mhm.
a lot of design at the beginning saves you a lot of headache later in this
Mhm.
industry.
Okay, so that's really good advice for the fintech companies that are looking to work with the banks. So that's interesting. So can we flip it over and say, what would you suggest to the banks to keep in mind when working with the fintech companies? How should they best go about partnering? Or what
Oh,
security concerns maybe they should have?
yeah. If there was one thing I would remind banks, it's that the people you're working with don't know. Right? That on the other side, they don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
they don't like, why are you telling me this? Oh, because Reg Y. They don't know
Mm-hmm.
what that is. Right? Right?
So you're getting a lot
Oh,
of
this,
education.
yeah, this is a BSA violation. What is that? Right? Um, it
Mhm.
also that it's very difficult for, I think it's very difficult for banks to perceive um, how much complexity they've spent years abstracting away so that what the customer sees is an account number with just one moving number in it.
Mhm.
That people really believe that a checking account is basically just a ledger with a moving balance number. I have no idea that it's also thousands of interactions between hundreds and hundreds of different workflows on the back end that are keeping that account regulatorily sound, and that the
Mhm.
presentation of that number is basically because you have the right to present it, not
Mhm.
because that's all there is.
Mhm.
um, and so it can be very difficult for banks to remember when they're working, especially with newer founders who are not from financial services. That,
Mhm.
for instance, our change of address process has 26 steps, and it's a relatively tight process,
Mhm.
right? Um, because we have to consider things like, well, when you change address, did the signature cards have to change? Did we need signature cards from you? Do you have any products that require them? Are there any agreements that have notice addresses in them for which we're required to send you a paper notice?
Mhm.
Have all of those pointers been updated so that those all get triggered if something happens? Um, and so there's an enormous number of things that we do on the back end, and we call that change of address. I
Mhm.
mean, there's actually 26 things are change of address.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and then it's like, well, and we don't actually call that your account, but your
Mhm.
account is actually 700 different processes
Mhm.
that include change of address, which is itself 26 processes. It's
Mhm.
thousands of things to give you that one number. And
Mhm.
banks act like, well, why don't you get it? Well,
Mhm.
there's no way you could get it, right? It's impossible
I
for
don't
someone
know.
outside to understand.
Mhm.
um, it's
Mhm.
easy to forget this. Like, you're going to have to explain more to the customer than this. It's simply not. Oh, our change of address process is hard. Well, tell them how hard it is.
Right, and really what and why it's so hard. Yeah, yes. So that's
Yeah,
very interesting. Yeah, that there's an education process definitely, and banks have a lot of information that they can educate the fintechs on. That's for sure. Okay, one last question I'd like to ask you. Just an open-ended question. Why Softjourn? What do you think has been the best thing about working with us?
well, this isn't the first time I've worked with Softjourn. I'm a repeat offender. And actually, people who have worked for me and worked with me have been repeat offenders since working with Software and through me also. And I think that there are a few reasons why Software and not others, because I've worked with a lot of other firms, and I've been happy with other firms too. Software is certainly not the only firm that's ever made me happy, but it's definitely my go-to. And the number one reason has got to be the people and the teams that are put together. That that Softtrain is one of the only is one of the only firms you can go to that when you have a team, when you stand up a team for a project, the project team truly feels like they're owners in the project. The project management leads on Softjourn projects, frankly, are probably more rigorous project managers than than I myself actually put on projects. Um, that more specific, more dedicated, more focused, are more rigorous in maintaining the inputs and outputs and being able to present them and slice and dice them properly. It's I always like to say that I run really like clean adult operations, but the truth is, by comparison, I don't. Software actually does a better job of keeping the process clean than I do. Um, but also, those teams tend to have really creative thinkers, which is a very unusual quality for an outsourced provider of technology labor. It usually, the expectation is that the customer will do all the thinking, and then the outsourcer will do all the coding, as though those two things aren't one thing. Um, and Softjourn actually takes a stance on understanding the problem and understanding how to solve the problem, and there we have real debates on the best way to solve a problem and what's necessary for the scope. And everything isn't accepted out of hand as this is the right answer. There's actually enough pushback to make real business decisions on the things that we're doing, and I don't have to do that in a meeting room in advance and then tell Softjourn what happened later. Softjourn is actually a first-class participant in making those decisions, and not in sort of a fantastical way, like an Accenture, where it's the business consultants. No, but they're a real participant in the business, and that's something different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, Softjourn. I mean, I don't know if Softjourn appreciates it, but the willingness. Oh, it's funny. I've never had that turn up. I don't know if Softjourn appreciates this, but the willingness to accept some of the more wackadoo projects that I've been interested in. I think the first project we ever did was reverse engineering a closed source, uh, closed driver device so that we could take the data stream out of the device driver blind, reprocess it, output it to PDF, because the system we were building. I think this was actually our very first proof of concept, was a device redirector from a device driver we didn't have the source for, reverse engineering the output to it and generating emails from the image that came out of the writes to the USB device,
Mm-hmm.
so that we could make digital copies of it, because the
All
platform just
legally
didn't know.
reverse engineered.
Yes, yes, in a completely black box
Mm-hmm.
scenario where you worked from a completely locked device and a
Mm-hmm.
completely blind set of inputs and outputs. Um, I don't honestly know who else would sign up for a project like that. I mean, frankly, there was no one even internally who was willing to look at that topic. Um, but
Challenges.
the funny thing was, not only the project came in on budget,
Mm-hmm.
early, worked on the first try.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually pretty surprising, since the truth is most of us thought that it wouldn't work out. Um, we actually didn't think that that project was going to succeed. And so there's a lot of, there's certainly, there's something to be said for working with a firm who has guts. Um, and there are lots of firms who will say, I'll do some chintzy web project, or I'll help you build this business system,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody has to be able to do that, of
Mm-hmm.
course.
Mm-hmm.
But it's sort of special to have a go-to firm who says, I'd be willing to attempt this thing that we're not sure it's going to work, and it's really hard, and I'm going to have to find someone who specializes in doing something that's weird and hard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even more special when I can assume that most of the time it's going to be successful. I've been routinely surprised that
Or
it is
surprise.
now it's now a routine surprise that I
Hmm.
ask for things that I'm pretty sure aren't going to work, and they end up
Hmm.
working. I'm like, well, of course they figured out how to make that work. Um, so that, I mean, I think
Okay.
that that's sort of why Softjourn.
Hmm.
I think that there's every reason in the world to have multiple vendors, but if what you really care about is creative solutioning and the ability to do it in a timely, on budget way, Softjourn
Hmm.
is a really good choice.
Hmm. All right. Well, all good words to hear and great to hear. We love the challenges of working with you guys. And thank you very much for your time. We've really enjoyed it. And thank you very much for providing some suggestions too to some other like banks and to fintechs. That's been really valuable. Thank
Uh,
you.
I'm sure that that will be in my career. That will be never ending.
Okay, all right.
Well, thanks so much. If I can do anything else, don't
Mhm.
hesitate to ask.